Hey everybody, Dave Whitmarsh Consulting Group. Have a guest here, Stephen Long, that we were just joking about it. We spoke 8 or 9 years ago, and I was completely fascinated with this story. We've swapped some emails since, but really haven't talked. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Stephen's up to. And I don't really want to share what I know, so maybe we'll just talk a bit with Stephen and let him explain it all. So Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to lead you a bit here. So you do coaching and some training and have incorporated it into some pretty cool customers and hang out at some pretty cool spots, I remember.
Yes, it's coaching, training, and consulting, and there might be something else thrown in there as well. So, David, it's good to speak with you again. I always been very impressed with your professionalism. So, it's a privilege to be asked to be on your podcast. Yeah, so my career path is not what you call a traditional linear career path. I started off my career as a college football coach at the University of Delaware and the University of Virginia. And when I went back to graduate school, after about 10 years of coaching, what I want for anybody who is considering to going back and getting a terminal degree, go back if you have a specific question that you want to answer. And I had a specific question is, why were the athletes who we thought were the most talented were not the most productive? Maybe they were close to the top of being the most productive. Maybe they're in the middle, or maybe they were a complete washout. And from a psychological standpoint, I wanted to answer that question. So my advisor from the University of Virginia, Dr. Bob Rotella, is a famous sports psychologist, and he developed a concept or a construct in academic terms called learned effectiveness. And it was a response to another academic construct that was developed by Marty Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania called learned helplessness. And what Seligman identified, particularly in young children, like 6 to 10-year-old children, is that some children basically have very low self-esteem, have very low frustration tolerance, and have very short attention spans. And so therefore they make very little out of their potential. They learn to make the least of their potential. So Bob Rotella, he just inverted that. He says, well, if you can learn to make the least out of your potential, why couldn't you learn to make the most out of your potential? So he was, very gracious and actually, David, when I went in to see my advisor at the University of Kansas to pitch him my idea for a dissertation topic, he just didn't like it at all. And that's when I went, uh-oh, this is how, doctoral students end up being doctoral students for like 7-8 years. And I'm already in my early to mid 30s, and I really don't have the time for this. But he gave me a great idea because he's also a Virginia grad. He says, why don't you come up with a psychometric that measures learned effectiveness? And I thought, well, that's a great idea. That is a great dissertation topic. But immediately I thought of Einstein's quote, the things that you can measure don't count for very much. And the things, that you can't count, count for a whole lot. And I thought this was just one of those abstract things that you're not going to be able to measure. But in the end, the psychometric was proven to be valid, reliable, and fair. But at my dissertation defense, I had all the numbers, so it was pretty routine. Except they asked me a question. My committee asked me a question: is that what happened in one of the statistical analyses, that it all factored into one concept. We started out very complex with 13 different subscales from 4 different psychological disciplines. But it all factored into one thing. And I really didn't, and you're trained as a doctoral student, when you go into your defense, never respond to a question with, I don't know. You have to know every answer to every question, or else, they may not pass you. But they said, so what is this one thing? And I said, I don't know. So, but it was outside the scope of the investigation. So that's, after the University of Kansas, I accepted an appointment at the Air Force Academy, and I was the head of performance psychology at the Air Force Academy within the Human Performance Lab. And my actual title was Performance Enhancement Counselor. And so my job was to enhance the performance of the cadets in any way, shape, or form that they wanted to enhance their performance. I was housed in the athletic department, but I worked in many different areas of their lives. And so I was just completely focused on developing tools and strategies to enhance performance. But at the same time, and the academy, it's just not Air Force, but Army and Navy, they're just, they're not normal universities, where professors are evaluated on their publishing and research. It's all about teaching at the Air Force Academy. So, but I had this psychometric, and I had access to 900 cadet athletes. So I just kept on collecting data. And because I wasn't evaluated for my publishing or research, I really didn't pay attention to it until I got a phone call from my contact at Institutional Research. He said, Steve, you should come up and take a look at the data. I said, yeah, you're probably right. This was after 3 years, David. Right?
Wow.
So I went up, and all the scores fell into a bell curve. I was like, well, that's interesting. And with 6 standard deviations being normally distributed. Now, if it's bimodal or positively or negatively skewed, it's over with. But being a normal distribution shows that it's a developmental concept. So I called Bob Rotella back. I said, I figured it out. He goes, yeah, what is it? I said, it's character. He goes, yep. I said, well, thanks, Bob. You've been a big help. And but it's a meta trait, because it was derived from these 13 subscales. So what exactly is it? And I just, I'm not a marketing genius. I'm not a genius at anything. I'm not a business person. So I really didn't know what to call it. And for a long time, I just call it the Human Performance and Leadership Inventory. All right. But recently I settled on a name, which I had the trademark for, and it's called the prosperity trait. And so there's different 2 types of psychological traits. There's personality traits, and then there's character traits. The personality traits are fairly fixed, and so if you're introverted, you may exhibit extroversion sometimes, and if you're extroverted, you may exhibit introversion at some time. But that introversion extroversion, it runs along a scale. Right, along a continuum. Mm-hmm. So it's not that we're introverted all the time, and it's not that we're extroverted all the time. But from a personality standpoint, it's fairly fixed. The cool thing about character traits is that they're all acquired. Okay, so give you an example. There's honesty and deceit. Right, and they run along a continuum, and some people are more honest and some people are more deceitful, but rarely will you see somebody totally polarized on being deceitful, or somebody polarized on being completely honest. Okay, and depending on the situation, we may float along that continuum as far as what we're comfortable with. Well, prosperity, and there are things I like about the term prosperity, and there are things I don't like. One of the things I don't like is that when people hear the word prosperity, they associate it mostly with financial prosperity. Yeah. And there is that. But because of what I've done, I've worked with people who have prospered artistically. I have worked with people who have prospered academically. I have worked with people who have prospered militarily. Okay, I've worked with people who have prospered, in business. Okay, and so it doesn't matter what the activity is, people can prosper, and as long as they're looking to prosper. But what I really liked about it is that when I looked at it in terms of what the corresponding trait is, because if the corresponding trait didn't make any sense, well, then I just can't call it the prosperity trade.
Right.
Okay. The the backside of prosperity is wastefulness. And that goes right to the heart of Bob Rotella's construct, right? And because many of us, and actually right to my original research, is many of us develop a mindset, a belief system, right? A worldview that disables us from maximizing our potential. And so we have this built-in block of waste just because of the way we think. Okay, so I'm more interested in finding pockets of waste anywhere in our society. And then, so that's the first thing I look for. And then the second thing I look for is where can I make an impact on systemic change? Okay, because individual change is great. And if I can help a person achieve that, that's terrific. If I can help an organization achieve change, that's terrific as well. But where I think the next wave of changes is systemic. And that's been shown through this pandemic. Is, last year you could say I took the year off, but I basically just did a lot of writing and a lot of observing. I just stayed away from anybody, because to be honest with you, when people are under a lot of pressure, the last person or the first person they should talk to is a psychologist. Okay, but in reality, it's the last person they want to talk to. So I didn't even bother anybody, and I just took the year to really just to observe and get my house in order in terms of my intellectual property. And what I saw from an economic standpoint is that the real problem that was occurring didn't have anything to do with fundamentals. Okay, is because we came out of the recession somewhere in the third or maybe even fourth quarter of 2020, but things were getting better. Okay, right. The fundamentals were there, but really it was the supply chain that was really messing things up. And so I've developed a program called Resiliency 2.0. And Resiliency 1.0 was, wow, C-level people are starting to realize that the supply chain is really important. So let's get, the structure of that correct and digitize it and do all that. And they did. And it didn't really fix much. Okay. All right. And so it's really about the people within the supply chain. Right? Are they going to be reliable? Are they going to be dependable? Are they going to be consistent? Because people who score high on the prosperity trade execute strategy more consistently to the best of their ability. Mm-hmm. So that's where I'm looking to make an impact, because I don't see anybody else talking about systemic change, and I don't see anybody else having basically having a model that is comprised of psychometrics and educational tools.
Now, do you think that's something that, okay, so first of all, great start. And now I don't remember why I can remember. There's a lot of big words in there to remember 9 years ago. So absolutely brilliant. But do you think that change is something that you can do in masses, or does it still take a lot of hand-holding individually or small teams?
Yeah, so I developed some programs that are student-centered learning. Okay, is that everybody has their own issues. Everybody has their own blocks, if you will, right? Or what I call points of friction.
Yeah, and I think truthfully, it's probably been more open and more evident now than ever before, right?
Yeah,
we all got baggage.
Yeah, that's what the pandemic has really exposed. It exposed all our vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. And but through online learning, I've created a program where people can pace themselves And depending on how they score on the test, it'll show what their, what the strengths are, what their weaknesses are. And then the program itself will actually tell the student as far as what they need to work on. Okay, so it's not like I'm going into a workshop, with a couple hundred people, and I'm just throwing up spaghetti to see what sticks on the wall.
Right.
All right. Each person is actually getting, it's mass customization. Each person is getting their own customized learning program, right? But, the person in marketing will have, a different program than the person in accounting, right?
Right.
The CEO and the CFO would probably have different programs, okay, just based on their strengths and weaknesses.
And that's all done in the original, based off the original assessment.
Yeah, and the assessment, is cool because it just measures one thing. So everybody gets a score, but then people get feedback on 4 areas, and they get the feedback in as far as what their driving forces are. So these are the areas you want to leverage, and then they get feedback on their points of friction. And these are just areas that are, the points of friction is a really good term, because they're just going against the grain. And if they can just basically just change their belief, change their mind about this one thing, all of a sudden things just become easier to become more efficient and actually more effective at the same time.
Yeah, that is awesome. So I know a bit about you. And so have you run that through any college or professional sports franchises yet?
No, because I'm just automating it now.
Oh, okay.
So that's the next phase to this grand experiment, is to automate it and then basically see what the results are. But what's cool, and this, David, is that performance is determined by feedback, quality of feedback, and the intermittency of feedback. And so there's a number of different modules within the training program. And so once the student finishes a module, they take the test again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there's a term in education called adequate yearly progress, AYP. And it's applicable, but it's not yearly progress. But if they don't meet adequate progress, they can't move on. Okay, so what we're looking for is a 1 sigma improvement in scores.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so if they improve their skills, or these subtraits of the prosperity trait by 1 sigma, then they move on to the next module, right?
Mm-hmm.
And by doing so, what happens is that you're guaranteed to show improvement in your performance, because it's been shown through the research is that if you improve your overall prosperity trait score by 1 sigma, you will improve your performance. Because you're making better decisions. You're learning faster, right? You're integrating new knowledge. And so all that leads to more consistent execution of the strategy.
Now, so I do want to visit, and because I kind of put you down a path, but I'll come back to that as far as your involvement in doing some pretty cool things with the NFL and NCAA. But so when you set up these programs, Steve, for corporations, and you get people in, how much of it is customized per the corporation, or how much of it is just a regular program that you basically turn off, turn on, right?
Yeah, it's the same program, but it's all dependent upon the feedback that each person receives.
Right.
So let's say we get ABC organization. Okay, and ABC organization has 7 different departments, and each department has 10 teams. Okay, so So in the end, all change occurs at the cellular level. Right? So each person is going through the same program based on their strengths and weaknesses. And as each person within each team, within each department, right, improves, their performance improves as well. And so collectively, that's where, that's where change occurs. But one of the benefits is each team leader will see what each of their team members is doing along with themselves. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so then they see where that vulnerable point is. And then the division head or the department head sees within their teams, who's doing well and who's not doing well. Okay. And then the CEO can look within his or her departments to see who's making progress and who isn't. And so that's organizational change, right? But systemically, it's the same thing, because shocks, the shocks to the system that, and it's just not pandemics, right? It's military action, it's climate events, right? It's a whole range of things that can cause problems, David, from, that they occur once every 3.7 years. Right? And each event will wipe out a half a year's worth of profits every 10 years. So you do the math cumulatively, and it gets to be a real problem. Okay. And so from a systemic standpoint within the supply chain, the shock is going to affect the most vulnerable organization first. And really what we're saying is that it's going to affect the least resilient manager within the supply chain. Okay. So now what I'm asking CEOs to do is just don't think of your organization as your team. Think of your supply chain as your team. Okay. Because you're as much dependent on them as you are with your internal people. Right. The bottom line is, though, but you don't have any power over those people out there. But all you can do is create a system, right, where these other people can be, can be held accountable, right? Because from a psychological standpoint, that comes first, right? And so even if let's say beta company within the supply chain is doing okay, but they don't score very well. Okay. And so at some point, they're not going to deliver what the customer needs. Okay. And so instead of waiting for all these other metrics, all these other KPIs, that Resiliency 1.0 is pointing out, well, from a psychological standpoint, as you well know, right, we're cognitive organisms, and if we want to stand up, we got to think about it first. So if you don't have the right mindset, particularly in a pressurized situation, at some point performance is going to go down. Right. And the thing is, we have to, people within the supply chain have to understand that we have a responsibility to each other, right? Because we have commitments to them. Not just to our internal people, but to the people that we have, to our external supply chain.
No, it's huge. Yeah. And what it would be interesting if you had the right company with the right power, that could actually roll their program in right through their supply chain, right?
Well, this is, actually a friend of mine just contacted me, and he was talking about, not just the Fortune 500, but Fortune 50 or the Fortune 10 companies. And so I coined a term called the command center, right? Some company has to be at the command center, right? And, it's a big dog. But there's a lot of companies that are relying on them. But from the feedback that I got from him is that, just like I said in the beginning of the interview, a lot of forward-thinking CEOs are starting to think strategically about resilience. Okay, and I don't mean to downplay the business component of it, because it is important, but if you fail to incorporate the psychological component, you're going to be caught off guard. So really those companies that are in the center of things, we used to think in terms of power as linear, right? Like in a Christmas tree, and all the power was set up top, right? I like to think of apple tree or apple tree structure, right? Is that really the power resides in the middle, right? And you're reaching down to get the resources, and then the benefits are growing out in the branches. And so these companies that find themselves in the center, and to be honest with you, this is one of the beauties of capitalism, just about every company in one way, shape, or form is at the center of a supply chain. All right. Okay. All right. Now there are some companies that are only in the center of a supply chain, those Fortune 10 companies, but just about every company will be in a supply chain, and some will, and they'll all be in the center of some supply chain of theirs. And that's where that's where they have the leverage. But it seems, that people want to solve this problem. And this is just one way to, to really to control the variable that they, pretty much ignored in the past.
And so where do you, because this is relatively newer for you, right? So where do you see this? What sort of impacts are you hypothesizing that will happen, to a company that adopts type of thing, 3 years down the road? Or let's say 3.7 years down the road.
Yeah, that shocks will occur. Okay. But their ability to withstand the shock and manage the shock will be much stronger and much more effective.
Right.
Right. So it's just like sports. You're gonna have a slump. You're gonna lose once in a while. You're gonna come across a really tough opponent. And it's not necessarily that you're going to have a peak performance every time, because after you peak, what do? You go down, right? But it's really about consistent high performance, regardless of the environment. And that's the thing about the prosperity trait that makes it unique, is that it provides a means for executives to perform at a high level, regardless of the environment. And that's one of the mind shifts that people, come to realize, is that it's not the environment, it's how I respond within the environment.
Yeah, super cool. Yeah, that is really cool. It's amazing, some of the stress, the stresses and things that, people face that alter their performance. I have a little off topic here, but I have a friend who works University of Notre Dame, and he's an optometrist. He's worked for the NHL and the NBA for the Pacers, and he specializes in damaged eyes, so elbows, pucks, and stuff. But he did a study with tennis players at University of Notre Dame, and measured the pressure in their eye, and literally could determine whether they were gonna double fault, serving, just based off of the most minute, impacts of physical things, right? So effectively, what you built is a way to get around some of that before you even get there.
Well, perception of the event has a great deal of impact on performance. So there's in the physical science, there are many laws. Talk to any engineer. They have to adhere to thousands of laws. In the social sciences, there are not many laws. Okay, there's lots of theories, and they've been proven. But one of the laws in social science is what's called the Yerkes-Dodson law of optimal arousal. And it measures on a graph between performance and arousal. And arousal could be stress, right? It could be energy. It could be, it's how you feel.
Mhm.
Okay. And what the prosperity trait enables people to do is to view events in a way that creates optimal arousal. Right? And so on that scale, it's an inverted U relationship. Right. And this is the one thing I try to get through to every football coach that I speak with, because they fully believe that the more pumped up you are, the better you play, that it's a linear relationship. And that's not true. Okay. They may enjoy getting people all pumped up, right? But it doesn't really, do anything to their performance. Okay. So what happens is that as stress goes up, performance goes up. We need stress. Stress is a good thing, right? It's just energy. But then as stress continues to go up, then it starts to level off. And as stress continues to go even further, that's when performance goes down. So on one side, I call it the drone zone. On the other side, I call it the panic zone. The reality is that they're two completely different states, but performance is still relatively low. What the prosperity trait, though, is it enables you to get into that optimal level of arousal. It's what I call the C zone. It's where you're most competitive. It's a relaxed intensity. Artists, musicians, actors, athletes, surgeons, they all understand this state. Okay, it's not the zone, it's just a relaxed intensity. But how can you be relaxed and intense at the same time? Well, it all depends on how you think about the situation and what you perceive about it. And what the prosperity trait, people high in the prosperity trait, they develop these cognitive skills on how to think about the situation. So, while this pandemic and we're being shut down, the most effective leaders, the ones who were high in the prosperity trait, they were looking how this was going to help them. They weren't denying the reality of it. People low in the prosperity trait, right? They're wasting time, they're wasting resources, they're wasting potential. Right. But people high in the prosperity trait, they were looking to see, how can I leverage the situation? Right. It's a unique situation. There's probably some kind of a benefit here, even though we're in this new, in this new era, this new state that we're in. So and post COVID, that's what the effective leaders are looking to do too, because if a company was lucky to make it through the shutdown, right? Now people, the leaders are recognizing that we're still standing, but the problem is that now a game of musical chairs has started, okay? And only a certain few are going to be able to get a chair, okay? And it's the ones who adapt most effectively to this new normal, whatever it is, right? Those are the people who are going to prosper from it.
No, wow.
But you can't prosper from it unless you're high in this trait.
Yeah, and totally, there's things that you can do structure wise, and I don't want to simplify this here, but I'm no PhD, right? So, but if we look at the 2008 recession, I'm in Canada. I think you're still in Colorado, aren't you? And so, our Canadian bank laws, banking, we have like 7 major banks in Canada, pretty much right across the whole country. And they have certain rules and regulations that they have to follow. So during that last recession, there was a bunch of banks in the US and around the world that sort of closed. So or had some issues, and a lot of those Canadian banks, just by having different structure in place, actually made a pretty significant dent into the US market. So the pain in the rear end for Canada, because we all had to get new cards. They they had to change all their names. It used to be Toronto Dominion Bank, and now it's TD Bank, and it used to be Bank of Nova Scotia, and now it's Scotia Bank. So, we all got mail like crazy to change their logo and brand. But if in certain pockets, you'll see that those banks, because of different structure, took over, right? So if you can take something out of this, if you have that right structure in place, when things get back up and running, you really have an opportunity to capitalize on people that didn't do their homework. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And when you bring in, the aspect of mental health, the prosperity trait is on the far end of health. It's a holistic and wholly positive character trait. So, you don't have to be sick to get better, but the people with basically the best mindset, the best mental health within a dysfunctional environment, they're the people. I mean, it's predictable. They're the people who are gonna prosper and succeed.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. And so that's what you did on your year off.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, well, we did a lot of home renovations like the rest of America, and that's where I became aware of this issue of supply chains.
Right.
Yeah, it was like, we can't get this because of the supply chain. What's going on? And then I started, investigating it and found out it just wasn't the home improvement industry. It was everywhere.
Right.
Yeah, everybody is trying to solve this supply chain issue. And they made a dent because what it became, it wasn't just an operational issue anymore. It became a C-level issue because the value at stake warranted C-level participation.
Right.
And now they realize how important it is, because if you can't rely upon a partner, well, then your partner can't rely upon you. It's, the weakest link in the chain is going to screw up that whole supply chain team. And so I think it became very clear to me early on, and I'm hoping business leaders are starting to recognize, is that I have an internal team, but I also have an external team, and I have to treat them as such. And if I'm the center of it, if I'm the command center of it, I have to act accordingly. I have to lead that team as well.
Well, in most cases, it's a pretty simple equation. If you can't bring stuff in your back door, you can't move, assemble, construct things out to put it out your front door, right? That's it. If you really think about that, and I don't even know where this status is, but in the 90s, the whole ISO 9000 or 9000 or 9001, I don't know if it's gone up, but that's almost, when I was working for a company, we went through that process. Really, Stephen, if you think about it, it's very much what along that same line. We felt that it was going to help our business because people would view us as being an organization that had their processes and everything in place to a certain standard, that you could effectively leave a job and somebody could come in and replace it. So there'd be less downtime, right? So you're, but it seems like you've taken it way farther than, big paperwork applications right in, and focusing between the years, right?
It's, in the end, it's all about human capital. And there's a saying in football coaching, it's not so much about the X's and O's, and it's more about the Johnnies and the Joes. So coaches who recognize that, they don't get me wrong, they spend a lot of time figuring out the X's and O's and making sure they're right, because if players aren't lined up in the right place, it doesn't matter how well off mentally they are. So the strategy has to be sound, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay. And this is the shift that I think a lot of leaders are starting to understand now, is that, strategy, the strategy is sound, And every time I change the strategy, the learning curve changes. So why am I changing the strategy just because my people aren't executing it? Why is it the strategy's fault? Maybe it's my people. Okay.
Mhm.
And, Jack Welch recognized this very early on in his tenure as the CEO of GE. Is that, he cut that, the reason why he was called Neutron Jack is because he cut the strategy department by 80%. Because he realized it's not so much about the strategy, it's getting people to execute the strategy.
Right.
And that's where he put his focus on. That's where he put his energies. That was his priority because that was the problem he needed to solve.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I can't wait to read, some of your stuff that you're going to come out with, and once you have, I think you're a big data head, right? So you're going to come up with some good stats and statistics on this, and in 3 years you're going to have some wicked good stuff to.
Yeah,
to share.
I'm going to be on a learning curve or upskilling into big data, which I'm excited about. But it is a different animal. And I've already reached out to some consultants who are experts in this. So that's one part I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, and what has your core business been? Like, what do you do most of the time, Steve?
Well, once we went into the shutdown, I just started writing because I think there were some things that people needed to learn. But in the end, with the organizations, I can go in and do the workshops and test them periodically. Basically just do the same thing that I'm talking about in an automated way. But the market's saying we want automation. We want we want on-demand learning. And I said, before you and I started the interview, we were talking about the beauty of streaming, right? Because we can watch what we want when we want. And it's really no different with a learning program. People want the programs, but they just want it when they want it. So I have to respond to that. Okay. And, and I think that's another thing that the pandemic said is that, you're not going to get 200 people in a room anymore.
Right.
Okay. In the same location. That's pre-COVID. Right? Post-COVID is automation. So, I can still do that, but, I'm going to just need a quarter or so to put this all up on an automated, it's going to be the prosperitytrade.com. So but, working with individuals, and I can tell you working with C-level people, it's not an ego thing, but because what happens with C-level people and the high performance of a company is that when they move forward, the rest of the company comes with them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You pull the mean, you don't push the mean. Right. And so when it's a natural tendency for people to respond to the leaders of the company, whether they're producers or the executives. And so that average person is always pretty much going to stay average. And when they see that leader taking off, that's when they step up their game. Okay. So it's just more cost effective to work with, the leaders of the company. So when I solicit a company, that's what I tell them is that it's not an ego thing, but those people have to be involved mainly because of the value that they generate for the rest of the organization. And that's why they get paid the way they do, because they have an impact on everybody else.
Yeah, I work with a lot of coaches and training companies and retention firms, and I can tell you that a real growing thing that I'm seeing is people, they're not interested in business anymore. Almost like their first criteria that they ask is, can we get your CEO on board with this? And if their CEO is not on board, they'll walk away from it, right? They just know that, hey, we're only going to take this, we're going to kick this ball so far, if your CEO or C level aren't going to be on board, and because we really need full involvement. So,
Yeah,
you
but
know, it's
there are times though, David, where the organization is relatively healthy, but they have
mhm,
one dysfunctional department.
yeah,
And so, with that, I don't say that the CEO needs to be involved. That department head has to be involved.
mhm,
Okay. But if it's just working with that weak link, that can be, that can be fairly beneficial to a company. So
oh, totally,
it's not a hard and fast rule, but generally speaking, yeah, and it's more than just the buy-in. Okay. The buy-in and the commitment from the CEO, when other people see the CEO and other C-level people engaged in the program, they go, okay, if it's worth his time or her time, must be worth mine.
yeah,
Okay. But in the end, it's really not about that. It's about the value that they create for everybody else. What I've noticed within athletic teams, the military, and business is that when you get the higher level people involved, they just pull everybody else. It becomes an organizational value. And so
mhm,
it creates a common language that shapes the culture. So in some regards, it actually, transforms the culture into a more performance-oriented culture, only because the leaders are involved and they're talking about it, and they're talking about it to everybody else. And it's not, it's not brain surgery. It's pretty
mhm.
simple stuff. Any 12-year-old can understand it. Okay. So just from a cost effectiveness standpoint, when I get involved with the leaders, it just affects everybody else.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
totally makes sense.
yeah. So it ends up just being, what does the company want? The company wants a training program. Well, then we got to automate it. If they want executive coaching, then, bring me the big dogs, and I'll get them squared away, and that will have an organizational effect as well.
Yeah, and like you say, there are many cases where you could have a branch in a state that's just got turnover like crazy, and you can
Mhm.
narrow it down to one manager that maybe just needs a little talking to, right? A little coaching, little
Yeah.
make them take a bit of the edges off them, and
Yeah. And I've had, several of those experiences, and they end up being much more willing to get on board than most people think. They see him as the problem child in the sandbox who won't play nicely with everybody else. But once they are provided with an opportunity to talk through things in a rational way, in a fair way, in a non-hierarchical way, it's what I call the third party phenomena. Is I may not be saying anything different than what their boss said, right? But because I don't have power over the person, they're much more willing to to share and be vulnerable and to look to grow.
Mhm, mhm.
So that's a really unique dynamic that I've found, that I hear from everybody else in the organization. Oh, he or she, oh yeah, they're a real problem. You're going to have problems with this one. And then you start the process, and they're more than willing. They're happy
Mhm.
to, and they respond really well.
Yeah,
So, and like I said,
yeah,
I'm no magician, but I think it's just this third party phenomena.
yeah. I'm guilty of that myself. It seems
Mhm.
like my wife will tell me a whole bunch of things, and she's much smarter than I am, and and then I'll listen to a podcast, and they'll say, "Hey, did you know that?" She's like, "Yeah, I've been telling you that for years," right? And it's like you really need that third party validation just to let things sink in. Right?
Well, I think I was first exposed to this through my father, who was a HR professional for many years. And, many times he was tasked with, go fix this person.
Mhm,
And he was pretty successful because he wasn't the supervisor. He wasn't the hiring manager. He was
mhm,
just the HR guy.
Yeah, that's back when they used to just be the nice guy in the office, right?
He never relished the corporate cop role. He was much more involved. It's probably why he left the business early. You know, he left to start his own search firm. And I think the companies that he was working for wanted him to be more of a corporate cop, and he was like, "That's not going to get you anywhere. You know, you can't push the meat."
Mhm.
You know, so and then he went out and did the search firm thing and made 10 times the money.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So it all works out. You just got to trust the universe at times.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So anything else you're working on, or people should know about you?
Yeah, the systemic change is really that's new, you know, where I can work with supply chains. The organizational change, that's been going really well, and the executive coaching for people who would like that. In the end, it's people ask me, what's the profile, of a successful candidate, whether it's individually or organizationally, and it just comes down to, do they want to get better? Yeah, that growth-oriented mindset. And then Carol Dweck from Stanford coined the term growth mindset. But I was talking about it about 15 years before she wrote her book, and it's a great book. I'm not downplaying what she's doing, but in the end, that's what it's about. If you think you're fixed, if you think you can't get better, or you think it's not worth it to get better, if you don't want to invest, if the incentive, this is really what it comes down to, particularly in business. If the incentive is not strong enough to get better, you won't get better.
Mm-hmm.
But if the incentive is there to get better, this is, to quite honest with you, this is probably one of the easiest and most efficient ways to do it, because no chair, you don't have to move one chair. You don't have to do anything to any computer programs. Right? All you're doing is change how you think about things. That's it.
Yeah. I have an idea for you that I'll talk to you offline, but yeah, that is super cool.
Yeah. Well, great. Yeah. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. Well, this is good. Thanks for jumping on here. This is awesome.
No, my pleasure, Dave. It's always good to speak with you, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the prosperity trait and systemic change.
And so if anybody happens to be listening to this, there will be contact information to get a hold of Stephen, and feel free to give him a call. And he's always been generous with me whenever I ask him for time, and I can't imagine any of you guys would be any different. So
no, that's what I do. I talk to people.
Yeah. Well, weird, eh? Making a living talking to people. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought? Yeah.
Well, I can tell you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, my father taught me a very important lesson when I was young. He says, "Don't get paid for what you do; get paid for what you know."
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, when I was in my early 20s, I was trying to figure out what to do, and I had no skills, and my academics sucked, and I knew I could do one thing, and that was talk. And so, I went right into sales.
Yeah.
I had, and truthfully, I've been there ever since, and it's just always been where I've been comfortable. Right? So
shows you how important the social skills are.
Yeah, this is awesome. All right. Thanks. And like I said, everybody feel free to reach out to Stephen. He's a great conversation. All right.
Thank you again, David.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.